Welcome back. Today we're stepping back in time to explore the forgotten town of Pioneer, Missouri. A place once full of life, now holding on to the echoes of the past. From weathered buildings to untold stories, let's uncover what remains of this historic little town. Excerpts from Lifetimes of Memories, Voices of Berry County, a collection of oral histories. My name is Robert Henry Ryder. I was born on October 31st, 1924. I am 83 now. My mother's name was Ella May Ryder, and her maiden name was Harper. My father was Harry Clark Ryder. There were 5 children in my family, 2 girls and 3 boys. My sister Catherine and brother Richard had the biggest influence on me growing up, as much as anyone. They kind of took care of me. My sister called me Hank while everybody else called me Robert. My brother took care of it if I got into trouble with some other boy. He was always there to take care of me. I was close to both my brother and sister. My mother was the one that disciplined us. Dad didn't. I just knew he was around, and we got along well. I was born at my parents' home east of Pioneer and was attended by Dr. Freeland, who lived at Pioneer. The house is still there. It's about to cave in, but it's still there. There was a big oak tree in the back of the house, and we had dug a well. I always thought it was the best tasting water. Sometimes we'd find on the edge of the well, where they dug the dirt out, ittle bitty skeletons of a worm, the joints. It was a circle, and they had a little hole in them. I guess they were prehistoric. My father farmed a little bit at that time. He had about 40 acres, I guess. We had chickens and stock, and we had a few cows, and when a cow had a calf, we had that stock too. I don't think we sold the milk. At that time, Grandfather Ryder worked along with my dad. Lead and zinc were common in that day, and my grandfather had a mine near Ploskifield. They changed the name of it, but they called it Bricefield at that time. Dad worked there part-time. He told me that at the mine, at the end of the day, my grandfather would go down into the mine and set dynamite charges off. They did that last thing of the day because you'd breathe that dynamite smoke, and it'd give you a headache. From Bricefield, they walked 4 or 5 miles home to Pioneer. Mining was even more dangerous then than it is now. This was at the same time that Joplin was operating so big. Joplin and Pitcher, Oklahoma were big mining fields. Pioneer was a thriving town. They had a mill dam, a big mill pond. They had a telephone exchange in the mill, which was a kind of an uncommon thing at that time. Of course, it didn't extend out into the country very far. At that time, they had one store, a big store with a Masonic lodge above it. There was a post office. At first, it was the Pioneer Post Office, and then it finally became part of Purdy Route. Later on, that Pioneer Post Office closed. The Hutchins family operated the mill until about 1941. I think they operated the telephone exchange also. One man sat at the desk with one of the old crank phones, and when somebody would call the number, he'd sit there and plug in the right wires to connect the 2 parties. It was a party line, so people could listen in to the calls if they wanted to, and a lot of them did. The store had a front porch that was probably 8 by 10 feet. On the end of the cement, there was a gas pump, one of the kind you pumped, and it pumped gas up and into the big globe. Inside the store, they had a cracker barrel and a big wood stove. Guys would come into the store during the day and just sit and talk. Usually a guy had a barrel of fish and salt, and he sold fish out of that barrel. They were cod or haddock or something. My parents bought bacon there, but Mom usually made her own bread, so we didn't buy bread. We ate a lot of chicken, because we had chickens. We lived at the spring at Pioneer and got our water from the spring. We put butter in that spring to keep it cold. The spring also had crawdads in it. We lived at Pioneer first, and then during the Depression we moved to Neosho. We probably left Pioneer about 1929. We stayed a couple of years at Neosho, and then we moved to St. Louis. This was hard times and during the Depression. Dad had relatives in St. Louis and he went up there first to get a job. We stayed in St. Louis for 10 years, but the mines brought us back to Pioneer. That was in 1940, and the government was subsidizing the mines to get ore and lead. The war hadn't started yet, so that's what brought us back to the country. My father owned the land. He didn't do actual mining, but found people to run the mine. A fellow from Pitcher, Oklahoma was the foreman. I had 2 years of high school in St. Louis when we came back to Pioneer. I went to Wheaton for the last 2 years. I was too small to play basketball, and that's all they played. I got along with the kids and made friends, and I graduated in 1942 when I was 17 years old. Pioneer had changed a lot when we came back in 1940. It was somewhat larger. The mill was going full blast, and it ran till about 1941 when Shoal Creek flooded Pioneer and the mill. It washed all the flour away, flooded the basement area, and filled it full of corn cobs. From then on, it kind of went downhill. Pioneer by Emily Davis Hudspeth. Cassville's salute to Pioneer Days this month brings to mind a beautiful little village called Pioneer, which we used to know. It was located near the northern border of Berry County, some 20 miles from Cassville. Memory pictures it as a pleasant little valley on the west bank of Shoal Creek. The valley was only about 3 city blocks wide and was flanked on its west by a sharply rising tree-covered ridge, such as well known in the foothills of the Ozarks. A dam had been placed across the creek, creating a wide expanse of clear water known as the mill pond. This because a grist mill was at one end of the valley, and a mill race created which turned a large water wheel furnishing power for grinding flour and cornmeal. The mill was Pioneer's only industry. It was owned by 3 brothers, Ike, Willie, and Johnny Hutchins, and operated by them and Johnny's sons, Harry and George, for many years. Pioneer was surrounded by well-kept farms, and the farmers brought their grain to the mill for grinding and depended on it for their supply of flour and cornmeal. The Hutchins brothers lived just across the valley from the mill at the foot of the ridge. There, a beautiful spring flowed from the hillside, and the brothers built a spring house over the spring branch. Their homes were built, one on each side of the spring. The little amphitheater which surrounded the spring was made into a small park with low rock wall forming a semicircle. The owners thoughtfully placed a bench all along the wall to seat visitors who came to drink, to admire the spring and its surroundings, and to meet and visit with friends. A huge pin oak tree stands over the spring, furnishing ample shade, and other trees grew on the lawns of the 2 houses and on the ridge above the spring. I remember also many flowers growing above the wall. Altogether, it was a delightful spot. Though it was privately owned, the kindly owners seemed happy to have everyone enjoy it with them. Not only was the spring in the park enjoyed by the entire neighborhood, but the spring house was built large enough so anyone who wished might bring jars of milk and butter, ripe melons, or whatever they wished to place in the cold water as it rippled over flat rocks. That was before the REA, and few farmers indeed knew the luxury of ice in the summer. And so it came about that the spring and spring house was thought of as public property. We once heard the late Mr. Hutchins remark that in all the years he lived there, none ever had cause to complain that anything left in the spring house had ever been molested. A footbridge crossed the spring branch just at the edge of the park, and across it tripped the children on their way up the hill to the schoolhouse. In summer, most boys preferred to wade through the cooling water in their bare feet. In times of drought, many a farmer from miles around came to the spring with wagons carrying barrels to fill with water to eke out his own failing supply until rains might fill his cisterns again. The spring was never known to fail to supply all who wished water. Besides the mill, Pioneer boasted a general store, which was also the post office and a blacksmith shop. At one time, there was a small millinery shop too. At the opposite end of the valley from the mill stood a little white church beside a lovely grove of trees. These buildings and some 24 small but neat homes made up the town. There were trees along the bank of the mill pond and a grassy spot for games and strolling. In winter, gay skating parties were enjoyed on the mill pond by the young people of the neighborhood. In summer, the young people liked to gather at the spring on Sunday afternoons, sometimes sharing a picnic supper and attending church later in the evening. We have seen the grove behind the church dotted with tents and a large tabernacle where a camp meeting furnished much interest and some excitement for as much as 2 weeks at a time. This idyllic life was shared by a generation of boys and girls who grew up and scattered far and wide. After many years, someone thought of planning a reunion. It was thought perhaps 100 or more might return to renew old friendships. When the day arrived, more than 1,000 persons from east, west, north, and south arrived in Pioneer. What a reunion it was! Someone said, "I think this is what heaven is like." How the local people managed it, I will never know. But there was ample food for all, and it seemed as much more was left as eaten. There was a brief program, but the day was spent mostly walking about, meeting people one had known and loved, and recalling happy experiences shared long ago. The reunion was fortunately well-timed. Only a few years later, the mill burned, and a flood raced down Shoal Creek, washing away most of the town. It was never rebuilt. Most of the older generation had passed away to their reward, and others had moved away. So, Pioneer, memory in the minds of some 1,000 people or more. Pioneer may have faded, but its stories still whisper through the quiet. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us next time as we uncover more forgotten places.